The storm had come in fast, a snarling thing with black clouds twisting over the horizon like a pack of wolves chasing prey. Wind clawed at the buildings of Dry Creek, rattling shutters and whistling through gaps in the weathered boards. Rain slashed down in wild sheets, turning the dusty streets into rivers of mud and broken branches. Lanterns swung on rusted chains, casting fleeting halos of light that barely held against the dark. Inside the saloon, men spoke in hushed tones, eyes flickering to the window each time the wind screamed. No one played cards. No one laughed. The piano sat silent in the corner, its keys untouched. Fear had settled over the town like a wet blanket, thick and suffocating. The storm was bad, sure, but it wasn't the weather that kept men indoors. It was the promise of something worse riding on its tail. They came just after sundown. 6 riders, their oilskin coats slick with rain, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. The leader, a tall man with a cruel mouth and pale eyes, swung down from his horse and stomped through the mud with a predator's certainty. Silas Kincaid had returned, and with him, the Blackthorn riders. The names were spoken in whispers even before they'd vanished months ago after a bank job left 3 lawmen dead. Folks had prayed they'd been swallowed by the canyons. Tonight proved prayer wasn't worth spit. Silas pushed open the doors to the general store with one gloved hand, his men fanning out like shadows. Within moments, the glass shattered, and Clara Avery came tumbling out, her hair clinging to her face, her dress streaked with dirt and blood. One of the riders shoved her hard, sending her stumbling into the mud. She coughed and spat, but she didn't beg. A cluster of townsfolk gathered by the edge of the street, faces half hidden by scarves and hats. No one moved to help. A few women clutched their children close and hurried back into their homes. The sheriff was nowhere to be seen. "You thought you could turn on me," Silas growled, his voice a jagged thing beneath the howl of the wind. "Thought you could crawl to the law and bring down a Blackthorn." He grabbed Clara by the arm, hauling her upright. "I did what was right," she shot back, voice steady despite the tremor in her frame. Rain trickled down her cheek like a tear. Silas struck her hard across the face. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. No one stepped forward. "You'll pay for my brother," Silas spat. "You'll hang for it." The outlaws dragged her toward the fence post at the edge of town, where the prairie grass met the mud. The storm cracked overhead, lightning sketching the landscape in stark white lines. Clara stumbled, catching herself on hands and knees, but they gave her no mercy. A rope looped around her wrists, pulled tight until the skin turned white. "Leave her be, Silas," a voice called from the safety of a doorway. No one could say later who spoke. Silas didn't turn. He just grinned, teeth gleaming. "Any man with spine enough to claim her is welcome to step into the street," he announced. "But you better be ready to die for it." Silence swallowed the town. Clara pressed her back against the fence post, head high despite the blood at her lip. The rain plastered her hair to her face, and the wind tore at her dress. But her gaze didn't leave Silas. He looked back, amused. From the ridge above Dry Creek, a lone figure watched. The storm swallowed him, the mist and rain hiding his features, but the shape of a man on horseback was unmistakable. He sat unmoving, as if carved from stone, a wide-brimmed hat low over his brow. His horse shifted, muscles bunching beneath its slick coat. Another bolt of lightning split the sky, lighting the figure for a heartbeat. Silver spurs gleamed. Then the darkness closed in again. Down in the street, Silas waved a hand. "Leave her to the night. Let the storm take her. That's a Blackthorn sentence." The riders laughed, the sound thin and cruel against the wind. They mounted their horses and wheeled away, hooves churning up mud and water as they vanished into the storm, leaving Clara alone, bound to the fence in the darkness. Doors remained shut. Windows stayed shuttered. Time crawled. The wind screamed louder, the rain colder. Clara clenched her jaw, her fingers numb. She refused to cry. Then came the soft thud of hooves. She strained to see through the dark, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. A rider moved through the rain, approaching without haste. The horse, a big Mustang with a coat like tarnished silver, trotted into view. The man in the saddle wore a long coat and hat, his face shadowed. He stopped a few feet away, dismounted without a word. Mud sucked at his boots as he crossed to her. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said. His voice was rough, worn down by years and storms of his own. Something about it struck a chord deep in Clara's memory, though she couldn't place it. The man knelt, drawing a long hunting knife from his belt. He saw it through the rope in a single stroke. She stared at him, shivering, half in shock. "Who? Doesn't matter," he cut in. "Not on my land." The words carried more weight than their size should have allowed. They cracked through the fear like a lightning strike, leaving something steady in their wake. He rose, offering her a hand. The storm rolled on. Clara hesitated before taking his hand, her fingers numb and slick with rain. The stranger's grip was firm, steady, and without hesitation. He hauled her to her feet. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm whipped around them, drowning out the world beyond their patch of earth. His hat brim shadowed his face, but in the dim glow of a swaying lantern on a distant post, she glimpsed a rough-hewn jaw, streaks of gray in his beard, and eyes that held something older than years. "I don't know you," Clara said, her voice a dry rasp against the storm's howl. "No reason you should," he replied, sheathing his knife. "Name's Colt McKenna." It struck her then. The name, a story wrapped in dust and half-whispered in frontier towns. Colt McKenna had been a rancher once, a gunslinger before that. Some said he was dead, shot in the back over a card game. Others claimed he lived out in the high canyons, with only coyotes and ghosts for company. But no one expected to see him riding into Dry Creek in the middle of a storm. Clara straightened, squaring her shoulders, though every muscle in her body ached. "You shouldn't have done that. They'll come back." "They might," Colt said, his gaze scanning the empty street. "And if they do, I'll be here." A flicker of heat rose in Clara's chest, something she hadn't felt since the Blackthorn riders tore through her father's ranch a year ago, leaving ashes where fences had stood. Since then, she'd lived on the edge of survival, dodging Silas's men and the cowardice of a town too frightened to remember its own spine. "Why?" she asked, not bothering to hide the suspicion in her voice. "Why risk yourself for someone you don't know?" Colt considered her for a beat. "Because there's a line a man doesn't cross. And if someone's too scared to stand at it, then someone else better." He turned and walked to his horse, pulling a battered Winchester from the saddle scabbard. The weapon gleamed, worn but cared for. Clara watched him, every movement precise, unhurried. "You got a place to hole up?" he asked over his shoulder. She shook her head, then realized he couldn't see her through the rain. "Not one that'd be safe. Not now." "Then you ride with me," Colt said. It wasn't a question, and though a year of fear had taught Clara to mistrust any offer of help, something about him, the weathered calm in his voice, the way he looked at her like she wasn't already half dead, made her nod. He swung into the saddle and offered a hand again. Clara hesitated only a moment before taking it. He pulled her up behind him, the Mustang shifting beneath their combined weight, but holding steady. They rode out of Dry Creek, without a single curtain twitching. The storm chased them, the land stretching wide and unforgiving in every direction. Wind battered them, and thunder cracked like cannon fire. But Colt's horse kept a steady pace, knowing its rider's will as well as its own hooves. After what felt like hours, Colt guided them into a narrow canyon, where jagged cliffs rose on either side. The wind lessened, and the rain became a thin curtain. In the lee of an overhang, a makeshift camp sat waiting, a fire pit, a weathered bedroll, and a tarp stretched taut between rocks. "You live out here?" Clara asked, sliding down as Colt dismounted. "From time to time," he said, tying the horse, "when there's nothing worth keeping to town." He knelt by the fire pit and coaxed a small flame from damp kindling. It flickered to life, casting gold light on stone and rain-wet earth. Clara crouched close, soaking in the warmth. Only now did she realize how badly she was shaking. "You crossed Silas before?" she asked. Colt's face darkened, the lines at the corners of his mouth deepening. "Long time ago. He wasn't a man worth remembering then either." Clara looked into the fire. "He killed my father. Burned our land. Sheriff turned his eyes away. Townfolk, too. Said it wasn't their fight." Colt said nothing, but his jaw clenched. I tried to bring a marshal in, Clara continued, voice rough. Got word to one down in Abilene. Word must have leaked. Silas's brother came for me. Didn't make it back. That's what tonight was about. I figured, Colt murmured. The wind howled down the canyon, a coyote's cry rising with it. She met his eyes. He won't let it stand. Not now. He'll tear the town apart to find me. Then we make sure he don't find much left of himself to do it with. The words landed heavy, not as a boast, but a promise forged in the same iron as his spurs. Clara didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful. Maybe both. Colt reached for his rifle, checking the chamber. Storm will ease by morning. He'll ride back into town, thinking he owns it. And you'll be waiting. I reckon so. Clara stared at him, the firelight carving sharp planes in his weathered face. She thought of the tales she'd heard, of a man who once gunned down 3 rustlers with 4 bullets, who buried his wife in a shallow grave beside a dry riverbed and hadn't spoken her name since. And here he was, pulling a half-dead woman from a storm, declaring war on a gang no one else would challenge. You got a plan? She asked. I got a rifle, Colt answered, and I got enough left in me for one good fight. She believed him. In that moment, sitting by a guttering fire beneath the storm, Clara Avery felt something shift. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of it. The storm hadn't beaten them. Not yet. Morning would come, and with it blood. Dawn broke in streaks of copper and slate, the sky still heavy, with storm clouds lingering like bruises over the hills. Dry Creek stirred uneasy, the air thick with the smell of wet dust and the promise of violence. Windows remained shuttered, doors bolted. The storm might have passed, but every soul in town knew a worse one was coming. Silas Cade rode at the head of his men, 8 in total, each one hard-eyed and mean, tethered together by greed and the comfort of cruelty. They rode through the mud-churned main street, water pooling in wagon ruts, the clatter of hooves breaking the quiet like gunshots. Silas's broad-brimmed had shaded a face carved from rawhide and meanness, his beard streaked with gray, eyes cold as cellar stone. A double-barreled shotgun rested across his saddle, his fingers curling around it like it was part of his arm. They stopped in front of the town's only saloon, where the overhang sagged and the sign hung by a single rusted chain. No one came out. No one dared. Silas's voice cut the hush like a knife through canvas. Bring me the girl. No answer came. The storm might have emptied its rain, but the fear in Dry Creek was still knee-deep. Men peered from cracks in doorways. Women clutched children close. No sheriff in sight. The law here had long since been bought, buried, or chased out. Silas's eyes narrowed. I'll ask once. Still nothing. Behind him, Jonas Murrin, a thick-necked brute with a scar splitting his scalp, spat into the dirt. Maybe they forgot whose land this is. They'll remember, Silas growled. Then a voice answered from a far end of the street. Low, steady, and carrying over the silence like a bell toll. Your land stops where I say it does. All heads turned. Colt McKenna stepped out from between the livery stable and the old general store, rifle cradled in his arms, the muzzle pointed lazy at the ground, but his eyes promising anything but peace. Clara stood behind him, face pale, jaw set like cut stone. She wore a battered hat, her father's old revolver belted to her waist, the weight of it familiar and foreign all at once. Silas's lips peeled into a sneer. Well, hell, he drawled. Thought you were a ghost, McKenna. Funny, Colt said. Ghosts don't bleed. But you will. Tension snapped the air taut as a drawn rope. The Blackthorn riders shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward rifle butts and holster grips. Mud sucked at hooves. The town held its breath. You ain't got enough lead in that Winchester to put us all down, Jonas barked. Maybe, Colt allowed, but I'll start with you. Jonas's face twitched. Silas leaned forward in his saddle, voice oily. You're meddling in something bigger than you, old man. That girl's mine. She stole from me. Took a man's life. Your brother was no man, Clara said, stepping forward. Silas's gaze snapped to her. You'll wish you died in that storm, girl. Colt didn't flinch. You lay a hand on her, Cade, and I'll plant you so deep in this mud the worms'll have to dig down for you. A single moment stretched, the world narrowing to Colt's steady rifle, Clara's defiant glare, and Silas's darkening scowl. Then Silas spat into the mud. Kill 'em both. Gunfire erupted like a clap of thunder. The first shot cracked from Colt's Winchester, and Jonas Murrin pitched backward out of his saddle, a neat hole drilled through his chest. The report echoed off storefronts, setting crows to flight from the eaves. Clara dropped low as bullets chewed at the space where she'd stood. She fired twice, her father's cold barking in her grip, and one of Silas's men tumbled from his mount, blood blooming across his throat. Colt moved like a man 20 years younger, levering his rifle, firing, working the action again. Another rider slumped sideways, dragging his horse down in the mud. The street filled with smoke and curses, the air stinging with powder. A bullet clipped Colt's shoulder, spinning him half a step, but he steadied himself against a hitching post and fired again. A rider crashed into a water trough, lifeless before he hit the ground. Silas cursed, wheeling his horse around, shouting for his men to flank. But the narrow street worked against them, the mud slowing their mounts, and the townsfolk, emboldened by blood in the water, started to move. Old Gus from the hardware store fired a rusty shotgun from a window, the scatter taking a rider off his mount. Tommy Parson lobbed a rock that caught another outlaw in the temple, sending him sprawling. The town's long-suffocated courage cracked through, sharp and sudden. Clara reloaded with trembling fingers, heart hammering, the world a blur of smoke and rain. She caught a glimpse of Colt, face grim, blood on his sleeve, rifle still barking. "McKenna!" Silas bellowed, dismounting, shotgun in hand. "I'll gut you, you son of a—" Colt dropped his rifle, drew his revolver, and stepped into the open. "Then quit hollering and do it." They faced each other, 30 paces apart, mud-sucking at boots. The street fell eerily silent, even the rain holding its breath. Silas grinned, raising his shotgun. Colt fired first. The old peacemaker bucked in his grip, the slug catching Silas high in the chest, spinning him backwards. His shotgun loosed both barrels skyward as he hit the ground, the mud drinking his blood. For a moment, no one moved. The remaining Blackthorn men scattered, spurring horses toward the hills, leaving behind saddles and fallen comrades. The storm, in its final dying breaths, rattled a loose shutter. Clara's knees gave out, and she sank against a post, the revolver hanging loose in her hand. Colt holstered his gun, blood running down his arm. The townsfolk emerged slowly, faces pale, eyes wide. "You done?" Colt asked the empty street. No answer came but the wind. He turned to Clara. "You all right?" She managed a nod, though her legs refused to lift her. Colt reached down, offering that same rough, steady hand. "Come on, girl. Storm's past." She took it. Dry Creek would remember that day, not just for the blood and the thunder, but for the way a town's spine stiffened, and an old ghost came down from the hills to remind men where the line was drawn. The sun rose slow over Dry Creek, bleeding soft gold across the battered rooftops and shattered windows. The storm had scoured the land clean, leaving behind puddles and wagon ruts and the sharp, metallic scent of gunpowder clinging to the air. Smoke still drifted from a half-collapsed shed where a stray bullet had struck oil, but otherwise, the town held a heavy, watchful quiet, the kind that settles after a storm's fury when folk aren't sure if it's really over. Colt McKenna stood in the middle of the street, his shoulder bandaged with a strip of torn linen, his rifle slung across his back once more. He surveyed the town like a man counting the cost. Blood stained the earth where Silas Cade and his men had fallen, the muddy street pockmarked with boot prints and bullet holes. What was left of the Blackthorn riders had long since vanished into the hills, taking their cruelty with them. But Dry Creek was changed. Doors once barred now hung open. Faces peered cautiously from behind curtains. It wasn't courage yet, not fully, but it was the start of something. A flicker. Clara Danvers limped out from the old general store, her cheeks smudged with soot, her father's revolver still heavy on her hip. She moved stiffly, exhaustion weighing down each step, but her chin stayed high. There was a new set to her shoulders, one the town hadn't seen in her before. She spotted Colt, and for the first time in years, a thin, weary smile broke across her face. "You sticking around?" she asked, voice scratchy from smoke and fear swallowed down in the fight. Colt looked to the horizon, the endless stretch of canyons and sun-baked hills waiting beyond. "Never was much for staying," he said, though his boots didn't move. Clara came to stand beside him, following his gaze. The sky was clearing now, blue bleeding back into the heavens. She took a long, steadying breath. "Somebody's got to clean this mess," she said. "Bury the dead. Fix the windows. Tell folks they don't have to be afraid anymore." Colt gave a low grunt, something close to a chuckle. "Reckon you'd be good at it." "I don't know about that," she admitted, "but I aim to try." They stood in silence a moment, the weight of the past night hanging between them. The storm hadn't just broken the sky open. It had cracked something in this town, too. And out of it, something else could grow, if they let it. Behind them, folk had begun to gather. Gus, leaning heavy on his shotgun, nodded in Colt's direction. The Parson boy limped over with a battered hat clutched in his hands, eyes wide with unspoken thanks. Even old May Holloway came down off her porch, apron stained and hair unbound, to check the damage to her fence. It wasn't much, but it was something. "You could stay, you know," Clara said softly. We could use someone like you." Colt took a moment before answering. "I'm no sheriff. Didn't ask for one," she replied. "Just a man who knows where the line is, and isn't afraid to make sure it stays where it belongs." His jaw worked, the old ache of grief and memory stirring in his chest. Too many years of running, of ghosting from one place to the next, never letting the dust settle on his boots. A man can only outrun his past so long before he's just chasing his own shadow. "I've got some things need burying," he said, voice low. "Out there, past the ridge." Clara studied him a long moment, then nodded. "Then come back when you're done." The words hung there, an unspoken invitation. A thread stretched between two battered souls, frayed but holding. Colt gave a final look down the street. The bloodstains would fade, the bullet holes patched. The town would heal in its own time, but it would remember. Not just the night it fought back, but the man who drew the line and the girl who stood beside him. He tipped his hat to Clara. "You take care now, Miss Danvers." "And you, Colt McKenna." As he turned toward his horse, a battered old sorrel tied outside the livery, the sun broke fully over the horizon. Its light caught on the edges of the town's cracked windows, turning them to gold. The storm was gone. The dawn was here, and for the first time in a long, long while, Dry Creek wasn't afraid.